The 142nd Annual Assembly of the Interstellar Council was convening at Illuvian Central Station, an ancient bastion of diplomacy long heralded as the pinnacle of multi-species cooperation. Suspended in the vastness of space, the Illuvian hub resembled a living creature carved from metallic bone and light. Its outer shell, composed of self-regulating organic alloys, pulsed gently with energy veins that glowed like the circulatory system of a star-born organism. Within the grand hall, the air was filtered and maintained by hundreds of overlapping environment chambers, each customized to accommodate the delegates' atmospheric and physiological needs. Vapors hissed, vibrations hummed. Spectral colors shifted and danced in the transparent air, each a language in its own right. Beings of gas, light, crystal, and flesh floated, slithered, or stood poised at their assigned tiers. At the apex, presiding over this constellation of power, was Raz Kur, council chair and first mind of Valtor. His multi-lobed brain floated visibly in a semi-translucent cranial chamber, layered like rings of a sacred mineral, softly illuminated in hues of confident violet. With a gentle tapping of his sensory limbs on the central relay console, he brought the chamber to order. The sound echoed like vibrating obsidian through the intelligent wall membranes. Conversations dwindled. Oscillations ceased. For a moment, the only thing that remained was anticipation. It was not unusual. Council sessions were long, ritualized, and choreographed down to atomic regularity. But today, something felt different. No one, not even the ancient Kavaroon thought scribes or the probability-calculating Gronhe, could have predicted that in mere minutes the most delicate structure of galactic order would be disrupted. And not by war. Not by technology, but by a single sentence from a species long regarded as too young, too emotional: humanity. Down at the lowest ring, always the lowest, Ambassador Jonathan Reeve of the United Solar Systems of Humanity rose slowly from his seat. His formal robes of black and reflective silver shimmered faintly as they interacted with the environmental stabilizer field around him. A pulse of quiet recognition passed through the translator arrays, but no one expected what came next. Reeve did not activate his diplomatic signal. He did not bow to the chair. He did not follow the prescribed rituals now perfected across 142 assemblies. Instead, he simply looked straight ahead toward the center of the chamber where hundreds of sensory organs, optical nodules, kinetic tentacles, and collective thought fields focused on him in growing confusion. "I hereby announce," he said in precise standard English, each syllable caught and echoed by the Council's auto-translators cascading into hundreds of tongues and frequencies, "that from this moment forward the United Solar Systems of Humanity will terminate all existing agreements with the Council. All military, commercial, and scientific cooperation is suspended. All diplomatic channels are severed indefinitely." It was as though a vacuum imploded inside the chamber. Sound was consumed. Even the ilk then who communicated via infrasonic pulses that vibrated molecules rather than air went utterly still. Inside several biospheres, the atmosphere changed color, a signal of species-wide panic. Liquid-bodied delegates coiled back into reflective shells. But Reeve continued. There was no aggression in his voice, no flourish, no pride, only precision and finality. From the center podium, Raz Kur responded after a beat. His voice rumbled like ice breaking on a frozen ocean. "Ambassador Reeve," he said, the tones diplomatically neutral but laced with mild condescension. We understand your people face internal tensions. But this display, if it is intended as theater, is excessive. Reeve didn't reply. He reached into his robe and produced a thin, curved data glass, flexible, crystalline, and faintly glowing. With a single tap, it activated. Projected into the center of the chamber were a series of holograms, star maps, economic overlays, encrypted military routes. But the final line of the revealed document drew the entire room into stunned silence. Repartitioning of human colonial star clusters. Phase 1. Annexation of Delta IV extraction chain. Reacquisition of the Cygnus planetary system. Estimated completion 18 local cycles. Beneath it, the unmistakable red seal of the Council Security Commission. Top secret classification. Delegates rippled, muttered, clicked, flickered. Some called for a recess, others demanded an investigation. But Reeve merely lifted a hand, and silence returned, not by command, but by presence. "This is not the tantrum of a wounded species," he said, voice calm, deliberate. "This is the survival reflex of a civilization facing engineered extinction." Behind him, Deputy Lucille Tan, Singaporean-born, Ganymede raised, stepped forward. She held a conical device in one hand. A single press, and every piece of human-related data vanished from the Council systems. Planetary coordinates, fleet schematics, political nodes, gone. Delegates attempted immediate recovery. Every terminal returned the same message. The United Solar Systems of Humanity is no longer part of this network. Reeve's voice cut through the stunned silence like the blade of history. "And this is our first move." No one moved. No one dared speak. Eyes turned, not to Reeve, but to Razkoor, waiting for command, for something, anything that could restore the familiar. But Razkoor simply stared ahead. His cerebral matrix pulsed slowly. Orange now, the color of broken certainty. The human delegation, 6 in total, each bearing the sigil of a different stellar region, walked out of the chamber in silent formation. No one turned back. No words were exchanged. For the first time in nearly a century of interstellar integration, humanity walked out of the galaxy's seat of power. But they did not do so in defeat. They were not pushed. They were not exiled. They left because they had seen the board, and they knew the real game had only just begun. Those who remained, beings that once considered themselves apexes of intelligence and authority, watched the humans leave, not with disdain, not with amusement, but with a fear the Council had never known before. The moment the chamber doors sealed behind the last step of the human delegation, a new kind of silence fell upon the grand hall. One that carried no sound, no movement, and yet pressed against every consciousness like the weight of space itself. It was not fear, nor anger, not even uncertainty. It was vacuum. Stillness so absolute it roared. Not a single voice emerged for 13 full standardized heartbeats. Even species with hive minds or neural time delays instinctively withheld their thoughts. No one wanted to speak first. No one wanted to make the mistake of pretending everything was normal. Then softly, like thunder behind thick glass, Council Chair Razkoor tapped one of his sensory limbs against the command desk. "Emergency session. Activate full lockdown. Seal all secondary data gates. Black Code Protocol, Level 1. The chamber dimmed. Ambient translation fields narrowed to core channels. Delegates who communicated by light began to flicker violently. their photonic limbs glowing with anxiety. Others shed chemicals, steam, or vibration fields. The inner circle of the Interstellar Council, composed of species whose decisions had once shaped the rise and fall of galaxies, now faced one question they were not prepared to answer. Just how much did humanity already know? From the shadowed periphery of the room, a tall, elongated being stepped forward. Chelvaru, special envoy of the Oloran clusters. Her 3 neural cores pulsed softly beneath her crystalline skin, each operating independently, each reaching the same conclusion with terrifying symmetry. "We believed they were still young," she said aloud, "barely 2 stellar centuries beyond their solar cradle." Another voice, sharper, followed immediately. Delegate Lirask of the Sitena, an archivist species capable of recalling every photon ever absorbed by their visual membranes, spoke in clipped, vibrating tones. "And yet they erased their entire stellar mapping from our primary networks in 3 seconds. Not just deletion," Chelvaru added. "The deep storage backups were overwritten with fractal encryption sequences, evolving recursive layers. We don't even know what language that is. We've never seen its structure." No one dared say the obvious, but the thought echoed across the silent frequencies. Not even the oldest species among them, some with 100 millennia of computational lineage, could have done that. And the humans had. In 3 seconds. Razkur's voice was slower now, stripped of its usual undertones of certainty. "Then it's true. They've been preparing. They were never pawns. They were players. And now they've taken their pieces off the board." On the far end of the hall, a small creature stirred. Entha, Director of Intelligence Synthesis. Its 6 compound eyes shifted from amber to pitch black. Biological signal of fear. Absolute fear. "We know nothing about them," Entha whispered. "Not their technology, not their strategy, not even their moral limits. They smile. They speak softly. They build embassies and send children to our universities. But inside, we have never known who they are." A chill descended across the chamber. Several environmental pods auto-regulated temperature down by 3 degrees. No one noticed. All attention was on the empty seat, the one Jonathan Reeve had just vacated. He had looked so calm, so resigned, as if he hadn't just dismantled the diplomatic web of the known galaxy, as if he'd simply closed a door that no longer served a purpose. "The question is no longer how to bring them back," Razkur said, voice like dust sinking through vacuum. "The question is, when they return, what will they be?" And no one answered. Because no one could. The emergency session extended into continuous cycles. Strategic analysts projected theoretical responses. Diplomatic historians offered context. Military liaisons provided threat matrices. But every model ended in failure. Every theory lacked variables. No one had data. No one had ever kept track of the humans because no one had ever taken them seriously enough to monitor them closely. That mistake now burned like a wound across the collective mind of the council. Some delegates began whispering ancient myths, once dismissed as pre-technological fantasy. One in particular recovered from fossilized code of the extinct Jonkar species, was suddenly re-examined. Beware the bipeds of the blue star, small of frame, chaotic in logic, capable of folding probability, capable of uniting enemies with nothing but dreams and defiance. It had once been labeled poetic absurdity. Now it circulated across every encrypted frequency in the Council archives. New task force was formed, the Refraction Council. Their mandate: locate humanity. Determine their next move. Prepare for the unknown. Thousands of listening posts at the galaxy's edge activated deep scan protocols. Every single one returned the same result. No signal, no motion, no trace. They haven't disappeared, Entha said during a closed session. They've simply moved somewhere we can't see. And that, more than anything, was what terrified them. The threat was not what the humans might do now. The threat was what might come next, when the unseen re-emerged wearing faces the Council could not recognize, with tools no species could counter. For the first time in its recorded history, the Interstellar Council issued a public statement. We no longer possess reliable data sufficient to predict future human behavior. It was more than an admission. It was a surrender of perception, a quiet funeral for the illusion of control. And within the stillness of the stars, only one certainty remained. The moment humanity closed the door was the moment the galaxy realized what it had lost. Not a volatile member, not a misfit, but perhaps the only thing that had ever shielded them from what lies in the dark. And the next time humans returned, they would not be asking for entry. They would be asking at who among you is worthy to stand beside us. From low Earth orbit, the Hermes Strategic Command Station floated silently, an artificial node suspended against the velvet black of space. Outwardly, it resembled any other civilian research facility. Solar arrays extended toward the sun. High-bandwidth antennas tracking nearby star systems and thermal shielding adjusted with quiet precision. But inside its hull, beneath layers of titanium carbon composites and radiation-absorbing membranes, there was nothing ordinary. Hermes was never a research station. It was the spine of something far older, far quieter. It was the central nerve of Omega Protocol, a contingency so deeply buried within the fabric of human strategy that even many in the Interstellar Council's intelligence divisions had dismissed its possibility. They were wrong. Lucille Tan stood at the heart of the command chamber. A spherical space filled with layered projections of star clusters, battle simulations, and constantly shifting data. The holographic tactical map before her pulsed gently, a living interface reflecting real-time changes across human-controlled regions. Red markers blinked into existence like drops of blood across a galactic canvas, forming rings, converging along corridors, consolidating near the edges of what was once known as shared space. Lucille's hands were folded behind her back. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the pattern forming in front of her. "They're still watching," she said softly. "They think this is a bluff." Standing beside her, Admiral Alexander Reese, Supreme Commander of the Unified Human Defense Fleet, breathed in, then out. Then without hesitation he spoke into the encrypted comm line. Authorization Omega-1. Begin Phase 2. Initiate mobilization of all stealth fleet assets. Suspend access to all commercial jump gates. Terminate transmission from border stations. As of this moment, humanity ceases to be detectable. Across the solar system, silent machinery responded. On Enceladus, deep within the icy moon's mantle, dormant shipyards came to life. Vast hangars unsealed with no sound. Warships of designs never seen in the Council's archives hummed awake. Matte black, identification-free, radar-absorbent. No transponders, no heraldry, no trace, only purpose. In the shadows of the asteroid belt they emerged like ghosts, not warships in the traditional sense, but predatory phantoms. Built not to impress, built to survive, built to end wars before they start. On Mars, civilian research modules were quietly replaced with next-generation energy shielding nodes. Hybrid systems developed from salvaged Council tech, reverse-engineered and refined across decades. Beneath red sands, interstellar-range missile silos finished charging. Not one transmission was leaked, not one anomaly registered on Council channels. To outsiders, the solar system seemed to fall eerily quiet, as if time had paused. But inside was motion, preparation, and resolve forged in silence. On the command screen, Jonathan Reeve appeared, calm as always. The man who had walked out of the grand hall without raising his voice, and yet shaken an entire galaxy. "Let them think we left in fear," he said evenly. "Let them believe we've given up. It doesn't matter. They've never understood us. They never looked beyond the surface. All they ever saw was what we allowed." Lucille didn't speak. She only nodded. "And if they ask why we're doing this," she said after a moment. Reeve paused, then replied, "Because we've been preparing for this day for 10 years. They are not our target. Life is, and we will protect it at any cost." Deep beneath the lunar surface, at the biological vault known as Lunex, cryogenic modules began waking. These were no ordinary gene banks. These were legacy codes, humanity's carefully curated response to extinction-level scenarios. Hundreds of thousands of encoded DNA profiles, engineered for resilience, memory retention, and adaptability, stored in sub-zero silence, now pulsed with power again. It wasn't just preservation, it was seed stock for something new. Beyond Neptune, in the scattered remnants of the Kuiper Belt, a chain of satellites disengaged from their camouflage. They spread like a net, not for communication but for detection. Each was a quantum anomaly detector, capable of registering fluctuations in space-time at the Planck scale. The Council had never achieved such precision, but humanity had. Quietly, relentlessly. Because they knew the first strike may not come from a fleet, but from a ripple in the void. At Europa's sub-ice facility, deep communication arrays pulsed with neutrino and biosignal interleaves, frequencies impossible to intercept or jam. Some were pings to allies, some were questions to old friends, and some were simply signals saying, "We're still here. We never stopped watching. Are you ready now?" Because humanity was never alone, on a planet catalogued only as HD-21749C, long thought devoid of intelligent life, supplies arrived. No flag, no communications, just containers of food, medicine, and tools. And one object placed at the center of the village, a medical scanner bearing only one symbol, a double helix. Those who knew it meant, you are not forgotten, but you must stand. Back at Hermes, Lucille walked down into the deepest level. Far below the tactical decks, past biometric scanners and null fields, lay a room very few knew existed. The null chamber. There was no light here, no electromagnetic radiation, no gravity. At its center, suspended within a perfectly stabilized space-time pocket, floated something that could not be described as human, nor machine. It breathed. It learned. It dreamed. The result of centuries of synthetic biological convergence, of knowledge passed through whispers and war, of code evolved not by instruction, but by purpose. Lucille stood before it, whispered just 2 words. Wake up. Its eyes opened, no pupils, no whites, just an awareness so complete it needed no expression. It had no name, no rank, no protocol chain. It wasn't created to serve, it was born to respond. And now, its moment had come. Jonathan Reeves' voice returned once more to the command network. They rejected us when we asked for a seat. They dismissed us when we offered partnership. They smiled while planning to divide us, but we endured, and we watched. And now we move, not to take vengeance, but to give the galaxy a final chance, to choose what it becomes next. In the dark corners of the galaxy, strange things began to happen. A sector once patrolled by human logistics ships went dark, but instead of disorder, local systems reported peace. Trade self-stabilized. Old smuggling routes were converted into protected lanes. No one claimed credit. Across the spiral arms, pre-industrial species received care packages they couldn't identify. Tools perfectly adapted to their biology, instructions written in universal pictographs. The signature always the same, a folded star inside a circle, and somewhere on the galactic rim a single probe emerged from a blind pocket of dark matter. It bore no weapons, no words, just a pulse repeating on the Fibonacci sequence. Council astronomers labeled it an anomaly. Council analysts labeled it a threat. But to those who had truly watched humanity, it was a greeting and a warning. Because the Omega Protocol was never a military operation, it was a redefinition. A statement not of domination, but of sovereignty. The humans weren't leaving to hide. They were stepping back to allow a new structure to form, not centered on power, but on choice. Join us, the unspoken message said, or step aside, because we no longer ask for permission to exist. We offer a way forward, and if no one comes, we'll walk it alone. Trell had lived through 3 galactic cycles, each longer than a human lifetime. He had observed planetary unions rise and collapse, watched interstellar trade blocks form like tides and fade like breath on glass. As a senior delegate to the Galactic Council, he had faced political impasses, military escalations, even system-wide plagues. He had never once felt what he felt now. Tension, unrelenting, undefinable, and it was everywhere. He stared at his console as wave after wave of incoming data scrolled across the curved interface. trade disruption reports, border conflict updates, anomaly logs, diplomatic silence alerts. But one pattern struck deeper than any of them. The humans were gone. Not in a loud, theatrical way, not with sirens or explosions, but quietly and with precision. Across the known galaxy, systems once flagged under human navigation or interlinked via Terran protocol were now voids. Empty fields where once pulses of commerce, traffic, and communication had passed. "They haven't vanished," Trell whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the environmental hum of his office. "They're doing something we can't see." The holographic star map hovered before him, a ribbon of stars stretching from the Scutum Centaurus arm all the way to the galactic core. Once this path had been speckled with indicators, colony pings, relay traffic, patrol coordinates, resource scans. Now, blank. No signal, no chatter, no imports, exports, or transit codes. Just absence. Outside the office chamber, the bioluminescent leaves of the Drellian air regulator trees hung low, their glow dimmer than usual. These trees, which helped maintain air circulation aboard Alluvian Station, were known to react to emotional atmospheric data. They were responding to something. To what, no one could say. But Trell knew it was more than just an empty chair in the council. It was the absence of presence, an unfillable void. He called for an emergency summit. No broadcasts, no formal motions, just a private gathering of high-level delegates, military, economic, diplomatic. The council's chair, Raz Kur, declined the invitation. "There's no reason to panic," he had transmitted coolly. "The humans are sulking. When their resource coffers run low, they'll return." But no one in Trell's private chamber echoed that certainty. If anything, they wore the same unease etched across his own layered facial membranes. The delegate from the Galactic Trade Consortium reported the following. "All human corporate accounts are in a state of non-motion. They haven't been drained. They haven't been closed. They're just idle, every credit untouched, every protocol intact, as if waiting for a trigger, a signal, or a countdown." Worse yet, private merchants had begun issuing their own warnings. Earth-based high-value exports, Irisian wine, hyper-Amazonian cacao, Europa synth neuron microchips, had disappeared from circulation across the span of 23 days. Not bought, not embargoed, not stolen, just gone. No manifests, no invoices, no registered transfers. Supply chains that once tied dozens of planetary economies to Earth were now cut, and the markets were bleeding. Trell inhaled deeply. His office biosensors logged a third spike in stress signals that day. The smart walls cooled the room, attempting to balance his rising pulse. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. "Incoming. Level 3. Alert. Outpost 472. Unnamed sector." He read the report once, then again, then a third time, just to be sure. "Human patrol units have withdrawn. The corridor remains unmonitored. Promaxian raiders have struck. Casualties, 28. Requesting assistance." Trell stood so abruptly that the assistant drone hovering at his shoulder flinched backward. No one had ever tracked it before, but the truth now pierced through inescapably. Humans had been patrolling the galactic fringe. They had done so quietly, unofficially, and without fanfare. They had never asked for acknowledgement, never claimed sectors, never sought praise. And now, in their absence, the voids were bleeding. For the first time in years, Trell activated his direct interstellar secure line, an archaic channel used only in moments when protocol no longer sufficed. He composed a single sentence. No titles, no demands, no embellishment. "We need to speak with you again. Please, respond." The message was sent in the Council's formal dialect, designed for clarity across species and systems. He waited. 5 seconds, 10, a minute, 2. No reply. Only silence. And then, worse, echo. His own words returned to him via the empty bandwidth of nothingness. The next day, an observatory on Kexor 4 reported a security breach. Their planetary satellite grid had been neutralized in less than a millisecond. No weapon, no signature, no trail. They called it a soft erasure. Nothing exploded. Nothing failed. The data simply ceased to exist. 3 days later, the commercial jump network connecting several merchant clusters began to unravel. Auto-routing systems failed to connect with logistical hubs. The reason? All human-run logistic platforms had ceased transmission. Not crashed, not sabotaged, just absent. 1 week later, the Galactic Security Council escalated its alert status to Level 4. Their statement was brief. The situation no longer qualifies as diplomatic strain. We are witnessing a galactic-scale geopolitical reconfiguration in real time. Trell sat once again before the massive observation glass of Illuvian Station. Years ago, he had stood here watching the first crude human ships arrive. Noisy, imperfect, but alive with something no simulation could replicate. Now, the same expanse felt like a funeral. But no one had died. There were no mourners. Only silence. A soft knock. One of his aides entered, eyes wide, holding a datapad. "Sir, message from Tersar Cluster. A pre-industrial species claims they encountered a group of humans." Trell blinked. "Humans? There?" The aide nodded. "They carried no banners, spoke no words. They left behind a single object, a water purification unit. Then they vanished." Trell took the pad, read the notes. One detail stood out. The device was made of an unknown alloy. Engraved into its surface was a sentence in simple galactic script. "We did not abandon you. We simply wanted you to learn how to stand." That night, Trell did not sleep. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in over 3 decades. He wrote by hand. A journal entry, no encryption, no distribution, just ink. And truth. When a species no longer needs to be accepted, but instead redefines its place in the cosmos, we are no longer the center. We are merely those who failed to keep pace. And still the void deepened. No threats, no invasions, no ultimatums, but also no forgetting. Because it wasn't just that humanity had left the table, it was that they had carried something with them, something no one had known they were holding all along. The weight of a galaxy they had held in balance. And now, they were returning, not as participants, not as guests, not as supplicants, but as those who had learned to walk through silence, and returned, not to speak, but to lead. The morning after, Trell stepped out of his sleeping chamber and into the soft, moss-lit corridor of the station. The artificial light that filtered down from the ceiling's fiber-optic panels cast a pale green hue across the floor. He could not tell if it was the lighting or the weight of unspoken thoughts, but his shadow on the wall seemed longer than usual, as if it were stretching towards something that had yet to arrive. In the communications wing, a four-limbed being named Garu, an Othlar technician, handed him a crystal data shard. "This is what the humans have shared with us," Garu said. "Information, technology, planetary recovery strategies, and their analysis of the Council's power architecture. But there is a segment encoded specifically for you." Trell took it without speaking. He knew what it meant. With the current level of surveillance and political pressure within the Council, merely possessing material linked to humanity could result in detainment or worse, permanent political erasure. But he didn't hesitate. That night, alone in his quarters, Trell activated the shard. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. Jonathan Reeves' face appeared, sharp, solemn, yet somehow filled with empathy. The eyes, even through layers of translation and projection, held a kind of clarity that seemed to cut through protocol. "If you are watching this," Reeve began, "it means we believe you can see further than the Council you have long served. We do not seek to dominate. We simply refuse to remain part of a system where ethics are the last item on the agenda. The Council has existed for thousands of years, and in that time you know what it has allowed to pass." Reeve paused, then stared directly into the lens. "Not all within the Council are corrupt, but too many have allowed stability to become the reason for silence. We have not, and when the time comes, people like you will need to choose to stand with the old order or beside a chance for something new." Trell didn't sleep that night. At dawn, he departed Station Hold 66 and returned to the Council as if nothing had changed. He spoke when needed. He voted when called. He kept his eyes open and his mouth closed. But in his core, something had shifted. There are truths that no report can capture. Some understandings live not in data but in breath. And Trell had inhaled something that now refused to leave him. This wasn't going to be a war over resources or territory. It was going to be a confrontation between two ideas: order and freedom. And Trell no longer knew which side was truly prepared. Back at Alluvion, Trell remained composed. He resumed council meetings, contributed to diplomatic briefings, and declined to speak of his journey or what he had witnessed. But at night in private, he began writing a classified report. Not on any council system, but by hand, on micron paper. A method so ancient that only those born before the spacefaring era remembered how to do it. He titled the document, "The Ones Who Reset the Board." In it he detailed the meeting at Station Hold 66. The meals the humans had brought, the stories they shared, the glow in the eyes of species long forgotten, now alive with something new. "The Council still thinks this is a crisis," he wrote. "But if there is a crisis, humanity didn't cause it. They are the mirror, the one we refuse to look into." He offered no warning, no recommendation, only one line at the end. If we cannot see the hands moving in the dark, then at least let us learn to see the light they leave behind. He folded the paper, locked it in a personal vault, then submitted a formal request to the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, a 3-week leave of absence, citing health reasons. While waiting for approval, he began quietly packing. Not to observe, this time, to listen. Because Trell had come to understand. The galaxy was not changing with war cries nor through declarations. It was shifting in the quiet, through conversations not logged, through gifts not announced, through alliances not signed but simply felt. And perhaps, just perhaps, humanity had already begun to answer the question the galaxy was too afraid to ask. Can we be better? And their answer wasn't spoken. It was acted. In darkness, with open hands. No one in the Galactic Council had anticipated that a single, seemingly insignificant void, a few remote border stations once quietly patrolled by humanity's fleet, would be the first crack in the facade. 3 cycles after the human withdrawal, the fractures began. Not through formal war, not through planetary invasions, but through fire, silence, and smoke. The commercial outpost at Delta 7 was reduced to ash. 2 Sylvani grain convoys vanished without a trace en route to their orbital markets. An energy station on Vorthal erupted in fire and metal, its last recorded signal a scream from masked Promaxian raiders. The Council dispatched its defense fleet, but it was too slow, uncoordinated, fragmented, and worst of all, they lacked intelligence. Trell received the first comprehensive report while attending a diplomatic function on Nexus Prime. He read it in silence, eyes moving line by line until they simply stopped. Since the human exodus from the interstellar security grid, the entire Western surveillance lattice had crumbled. Not due to lack of ships, not due to strategic failure, but due to something no one in the Council dared acknowledge: credibility. Trade fleets refused to depart. Outer systems reported rampant signal interference. SOS beacons blinked into the void with no response, lost in a sea of bureaucracy and underfunding. Fear spread like a silent contagion. Trell convened an emergency session with the Strategic Analysis Corps. Star maps pulsed with color transitions: green to yellow, yellow to deep red. Each flicker marked a slipping system. Warnings from independent observatories echoed like countdowns. On the Sylvani homeworlds, panic took form. 3 key agricultural planets are cut off. The Sylvani Central Coordinating Node transmitted. Supply chains collapsed. Populations in disarray. Paramilitary factions forming at local levels. Cities descending into chaos. Governance nearing collapse. Then came a private call. From a world that rarely reached out. Kiranus, a species known for its neutrality and deep-rooted isolation. The face of their diplomatic chief, pale, trembling, caught in the flickering light of a damaged hollow emitter, looked at Trell. "We've detected traces of biological weapons in the Perthrax Rim. That sector used to be under human protection. They never allowed such tech to proliferate. Now, there's no one left to stop it." In the next full council session, someone finally snapped, "We must call them back," a representative hissed. "Send a delegation, negotiate." Razkur, who had remained ominously silent for many cycles, spoke at last. "And say what? That we laughed at them? That we mocked them as primitive?" Silence followed. Not the bureaucratic kind, but something heavier, something laced with shame. Trell leaned back in his chair. The emotion inside him was strange, a fusion of embarrassment and anger, but not directed at humanity, at himself, at the system that had dismissed an ally, because they had been too human. Then the next wave hit. 32 border outposts fell. Over 100,000 beings either lost or displaced. Entire sectors once stabilized by human patrols had collapsed into anarchy. Criminal syndicates rose from the vacuum. Remnants of ancient wars staked claims. On Glaven IV, a dead world long believed abandoned, a mercenary faction raised a red and black flag. No symbols, only 5 words. "There are no laws here." Trell watched footage of a town incinerated by plasma storms. No survivors. The final frame? A Silvani child clutching a stuffed bear, standing alone amid the ashes. 20 systems broadcast pleas for help to the Council. All were former human responsibility zones. This time, no response came in time. The average delay in mobilization? Over 17 standard hours, enough for a city to burn, for a culture to fracture. Razkur, ever the cold spine of procedure, spoke again. "We must act," he said, voice like falling stone, "before this galaxy collapses from within." A rushed vote was held. 6 out of 7 major species agreed. A high-level diplomatic envoy would be sent to Earth. But this time it was not Earth requesting entry, it was the center pleading with the edge. Trell abstained. He sat in silence, eyes fixed on the main star map, watching. As once vibrant constellations began to fade from the Council's strategic display, not due to interference, not due to war, but because someone somewhere was erasing the dust of an old world order and sketching the outline of something new. A structure no longer drawn by the Council's hand, but by those who had left the table and never stopped playing the game. The high delegation of the Galactic Council descended onto Earth under a quiet, chilled morning sky. The Gaia Prime International Reception Station, anchored in geostationary orbit, was not a fortress, yet it clearly was no longer the humble outpost of a fledgling civilization. Every detail, from the polished alloy walkways to the precisely calibrated atmosphere accommodating every species and even the individualized gravitational zones, radiated preparation. And a different kind of power, silent, steady, and unquestionable. Razkur led the group. His once glimmering, multifaceted brain flesh now looked dim, washed out under the station lights. No trace remained of his signature smirk. Beside him, Trell walked silently. Older, thinner, his posture more fragile. But within, an unrest stirred. Confusion, caution, and inexplicably hope. They were met not with banners, not with ceremonial trumpets, but by Lucille Tan. No titles, no speeches, no warmth, just a cool stare. And one sentence. "You should have come a cycle ago." The Council was led deep beneath Geneva into a chamber hidden 700 meters below the Earth's crust. The walls were formed of scan-proof, non-metallic composite. Each stone tile in the floor carried the symbolic weight of decisions once made under existential threat. The room wasn't large, but it felt like a sanctuary, a temple of resolve. At the central seat sat President Hana Mizuno of the Human Concord. Her presence was composed yet carried the clarity of intellect honed by both history and purpose. To her right, Ambassador Reeve, the symbol of human restraint. To her left, Admiral Jonathan Powell, Supreme Commander of what was now the most advanced defense architecture in the galaxy. There was no anthem, no fanfare, just expectation. Trell was invited to speak first. He stepped forward, no speechwriters, no aides, only the gravity of what needed to be said. "We believed we were leading you," he began, voice firm despite age. "But perhaps we were the ones who were lost. Today I do not come to demand, I come to listen." Then the Council laid forth its proposal: full restoration of bilateral relations, equal membership in every right, and astonishingly, an invitation for humanity to assume the rotating chair of the Galactic Council starting the next cycle. The room stilled. All eyes turned to Hana Mizuno. She stood slowly. Her hand rested lightly on the glass table. "We do not return to ask for anything. We do not rise to rule. We return because something must be healed, not for ourselves, for all." Reeve followed. "The first time we entered this council, our hearts were closed. You looked at us with disdain. We walked cautiously unheard. This time we bring what you never gave us: respect." No rebuttal came, because all in the room knew the old age was gone. In the weeks that followed, Earth became the new diplomatic nexus. Long-forgotten species emerged from isolation. Exploratory fleets from Navorus arrived. Philosophers of the gaseous Gylar made contact. Even the ice-shelled tribes, once hidden within comet shells, sent envoys. A new system began to form, not a pyramid, but a resonant web. At its center, humanity, not as overlords, but as the connective thread. Not power, but trust. Trell, ever the observer, chronicled the shift. His notations moved from transcription to reflection, from minutes to meaning. He wrote of humility, of power redefined, of the value of the underestimated. At the Eastern Rim Station on the Moon, Trell attended a conference organized entirely by young scholars. There he met a student from the Vayari, a race erased from diplomatic records 200 years prior. The student spoke haltingly in broken Terran. "We were not just given chance. We were trusted." Trell returned to Gaia Prime with a strange lightness. Not because balance had been restored, but because something better was blooming: fairness. At the distant edge of the Milky Way, a long-forgotten automated outpost flared to life. Its broadcast was simple: "Hello. It doesn't matter where you come from, Earth welcomes you as an old friend." At Gaia Prime's observatory deck, Trell stood in silence. Beyond the glass, the galaxy turned. Quiet, majestic, like the universe itself was nodding. A young Sylvani engineer approached him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "What scared me most is that they weren't angry. They just left. And now they return, not for revenge, but to make things right." Trell smiled gently. "Because they are human. They err, and learn. They bleed and heal. And when they stand again, the galaxy listens. That night on countless worlds, the children of a new era were taught an old word. One once used to mock, to dismiss, now reborn, humanity. And with it came the dawn, not by force, not by manipulation, but by the simplest act the old powers could never understand. Humanity had grown up, and this time they led. Lessons from Humanity. The power of quiet growth. In a universe filled with grand civilizations where the strong dictate the course of the weak and galactic councils shape the destiny of star systems through logic and majority, humanity, once dismissed as immature, chose a different path. Not resistance through firepower, not rebellion through manifesto, but through the quiet act of growing up. This story does not begin with a victory, it begins with a retreat. Humanity did not slam the table or declare war. They stood up, said goodbye, and walked away from a game that had never allowed them to play by fair rules. And yet, what made it monumental was not their departure, but the reason behind it. They left not to disappear, but to prepare. In silence, they rebuilt. Not only fleets or force fields, but trust, alliances, empathy, and strategy grounded in values. They did not retaliate. They did not ambush. They allowed those who once mocked them to face the price of arrogance. Not through wounds, but through absence. When humanity vanished from the systems they had quietly upheld, the galaxy began to crack. Not because a superpower was gone, but because the fulcrum had shifted. And when they returned, they brought no proclamation of dominance, but an invitation. They didn't demand the center chair. They offered a new framework of resonance, where every voice held equal weight. They didn't build an empire. They opened a destination where anyone could arrive and be welcomed as an old friend. The greatest message here isn't humanity is stronger than all. It is this: true maturity is a quiet, patient, and generous journey. Humanity in this story did not triumph through perfection, but through the resilience to learn. They were wounded, but didn't let pain ferment into rage. They had been victims, but chose not to become avengers. Instead, they walked the hardest road, not to teach others a lesson, but to become the lesson for the entire galaxy. And perhaps that's a mirror for us in the real world. That sometimes stepping back is not losing, but finding clarity. That silence doesn't mean weakness, but the stillness of reconstruction. And that when we finally rise again, it's not the loudest voice that's heard, but the presence that cannot be ignored. In this modern world where everything rushes forward, where everyone rushes to speak, to assert, to prove, humanity's story in the stars offers a rare reminder. Step back, not to retreat, but to see farther. Stay silent, not out of fear, but to speak rightly when it matters. And grow up, not for the approval of others, but for yourself, so that one day you may lead without ever needing to command.